Hey everybody, Robert with RC Archery, and you are watching Tuesday's Tip of the Week number 94. In this week's video, we're going to go over my entire stabilizer setup and routine. I'm also going to go over some extra tips as far as bar placement, why I'm running them in certain spots, why I have a down degree, quick disconnect on my front bar, little things like that. We're going to do some first-person views through my scope, so that you can see what I am looking at and what I am wanting out of different setups and different steps through this process. And in our members only video this week, we're gonna go over the light versus heavy stabilizers, why I am setting mine up the way that I do, and what I'm looking for with that. Let's get right into it. So typically the first thing I'm gonna do, especially if it's a brand new bow, is I wanna see how it balances as a bare bow. And for me, this gives me an idea of what I'm going to expect when I start putting on my stabilizers and when I start weighting the bow. So with this bow here, this is a Bowtech Reckoning. It's the Gen 2 36 axle to axle bow. So it's got a little bit different balance point than the 39, but I want to give you what this looks like and talk you through it compared to some of the other bows that I've had in the past. So for me, if I hold this bow out like this and then I go to let go, it will rock back. I mean, it's pretty much gonna come all the way back. The arrow rest here is hitting my hand, it's making it stop. However, I've had bows in the past that would flip over really aggressively and fast, which this one is still flipping over, but it's not super aggressive. Like, it wants to come through and come around, but it's not really, really top heavy and back heavy. So what that means is that this bow is gonna still need a decent amount of front weight, but it's not gonna need as much as, say, like the Supra that I had or a Hoyt Prevail that I had in the past that would flip over backwards really fast. There are bows on the market that won't flip over backwards at all. Some of them are pretty weighted and balanced to begin with, and some of them even slightly wanna lean forward. So that's something to keep in mind. If you have a bow that is more balanced to begin with, your ratios and your end point of how you're gonna get to everything will look totally different than what I'm doing today. You will need a little bit more back weight than I will. And also, depending on your grip style, you'll need something different than what I do today. If you have more of a high-wristed grip where you're pushing more in with the webbing, or if you have a low-wristed grip where you're pushing more with the palm of your hand, that's gonna completely change what you're looking at on the bow too. More of a high-wristed grip, you're gonna need more back weight, and then more of a low-wristed grip, you're gonna need more front weight. Typically, it's not always that way. Most of the time, that's what we're looking for. Going through the downward front bar angle. So a lot of people have this question that they ask me is why I do that, what does it do? So I wanna go over what that looks like and what it is really fast. So there's different ways that you can connect these front bars to the stabilizer. Some people run them where they're straight out of the bow, just completely straight like this. I typically will run these where they have a little bit of a downward angle to them, such as what you see here. This is an 8-degree downward angle on this Shrewd front bar mount. I've done 8 degrees and 10 degrees. It's super similar. I can't really tell the difference between the two of them. So the reason that I'm doing this though is that I notice for me that when I get to full draw and the stops run over and they're hitting the cables and everything is getting settled, for me, the side-to-side wiggle that I get from that is less and it stops way faster. If I have this bar just straight off the bow, I notice that I get some left and right wiggle a little bit longer. It takes a little longer to settle when I'm getting to anchor. And for me, I don't want it to take any longer to settle. I want my shot timing to not have to rely on having to wait for that. The other thing that it kind of does is, for me, I feel like it weights it a little bit more lower on the riser, so I get a little bit lower center of gravity. It feels like it's pulling into the ground a little bit more. It tends to help how I like it to feel. It's personal preference. I would try both. Pretty much anything that I'm going to tell you in this video is going to be personal preference when it comes to stabilizers, but that's why I do that and what I'm looking for. Back bar mounts. I'm running this on the front of the bow off this front bar, and this is how I've got it set up. You will notice that there's also a bushing here on the back. You can run this lower down on the riser and further back. A lot of people run these back bars on this mount here, and it separates and gives them two planes for the front and the back bar to work off of. It's totally different feel. I would suggest that you try both and see what you like best. I've had different bows react differently and better off of having the back bar higher up like this one or lower down. Shooting styles vary a lot, but typically what I have noticed is that when I run this back bar on this back mount, that one, it lowers the center of gravity, but it also makes the bow feel heavier to me. It feels like it's pulling it down into the ground more, and I have to work to hold it up on target more. So that's why I have recently switched to running it off this front mount and having it a little higher up. Keeps everything on the same plane more so. It just feels like it's lighter, I guess, as the bow is actually holding on target. It feels like it wants to have a less tendency to pull my arm down. The other thing that I'm noticing is it's not controlling the bottom of the riser as much, so that when the bow happens to, the shot breaks and the bow is jumping forward and everything is happening, I'm not seeing as drastic of a pull on the bow, and I can play around with weighting a little bit more and get a little bit different setup for me and have it balance better for me and not affect my tune, not affect the motion that I'm getting in my follow through and things like that. All right, real quick, let's get into stabilizer links, and then I'm gonna go over my first step and what I'm doing with this process. So for me, what I recommend to people is get a front stabilizer on a target setup that is longer than your draw length. Maybe that one step longer than the draw length. So like for me, I'm right around 28.25-ish. I run a 30-inch front bar. I don't like 33s. I've tried them in the past. It feels like the weight is too far away and it's just harder for me to aim. But I've also noticed with the 27-inch bar that it takes a ton of weight on those to seem like that I can get enough resistance and good balance into the bow. So I would recommend taking that one step above your draw length, trying that out for a front bar length. You really can't go wrong with that. If you're younger and or maybe you're a woman, you have shorter draw length, you're gonna want a shorter front bar, but if you've got a longer draw length, you're gonna want a longer front bar. Back bars are super independent to the archer and what they want. I have a 15-inch rear bar and I've run that for a long time, whether I've run it on the back of the bow or here on this front top mount. So for me, when I switched from a 12 to a 15-inch back bar, I noticed that one, I didn't need as much weight. And for me, I like a lighter setup than what you may see like Rio Wild and people like that, right? But it also just seems like that it takes the center of mass further away from the bow, seemed to help balance things a little bit better. I just noticed it was a little bit softer float picture that I saw and a little bit more resistance when I had some bobbles or movements or if I was out in the wind. Now, if you want to stack a lot of weight on your bow, you'll probably want a shorter back bar, 12-inch back bar, maybe even a 10-inch back bar, especially if you're running it off the back here. That'll help you a lot in the wind. It can help you a lot if you just like to run a really heavy bow. You can stack more weight on there. You're not gonna have it as far out away from center of mass on the bow, and it'll help you out a lot. So first steps for me, typically the first step that I'm gonna do is I'm gonna shoot the bow or at least do aiming drills with the bow with no weights at all on the front and the back bar. And the reason that I'm doing that is I'm also usually testing draw length at the same time. I'm wanting to see if my draw length and my loop length is in the right spot. Just like what we talked about in the video last week, it helps me as far as being able to not have the weight on the bow and soften my sight picture. If it's buzzy and quick and fast, I know I need a little bit longer somewhere. If it's slow and loopy and it's hard to control, I need a little shorter everywhere. But I also do this because I just want to see how the bow is reacting with no weights on the bars, and I just want to see what the aim looks like. I am not super scientific when it comes to the way that I'm setting up this back bar to begin with. I literally put this on here. If I'm running it on the lower mount, I'll run it level off the back of the bow, where this bar is just 90 degrees to the bow and it's just level coming straight out. Running it higher up like this, I have it angled down a little to begin with and angled out a little bit, and it's seriously just to clear my front arm. I want it to be able to have the bow extend forward through my follow through and not worry about my arm hitting this bar. I don't want it to come up and kick me and hit me, you know, do something crazy like that. That's it. I mean, that's all I'm doing. And I'm running it from that standpoint to start everything out. The reason that I would say if you're having it lower on here to have it coming out 90 degrees level is because the way that this rear bar acts is a leverage device. If you start angling this bar down, it's getting the weight closer to the center of mass, and it's making this bar react as if it's smaller. If you've got it at a 90-degree angle, you're getting the maximum amount of leverage from this rear bar based on the length of it. Now, you may not need that, but you know, that's something we'll do fine tuning later on, but that's where I started out. Now, when it's up here higher, I literally started out here because this is as high as I can run it without it hitting my arm and interfering with things. And I know that my weight system that we'll talk about in the next step, it's never gonna get higher than this. So if it needs more back weight, I'm adding more weight versus wanting to raise the bar up. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. That'll make sense in a minute, but this is what I'm starting with. And then I wanna see how it looks through my scope, through you know, my sight picture. I'm gonna drop back, I'm gonna aim on target, I'm gonna do everything like normal. Probably not shooting at this point, but I've done that in the past, depending on when I'm setting these bars up. If I'm just testing and doing aiming drills for draw length as well as stabilizers, I usually don't shoot. But it's important that whether you are or aren't shooting to still run through your shot the same, so that when we're pulling through our shot like normally, we are still pulling through and watching what we're getting with our sight picture. Now, in this step, you're gonna notice that it's a lot faster of an aim, it's twitchier, and everything is going on. Even if you found an optimal draw length and optimal loop length, you're still gonna have tension in the hand is gonna show up really quickly as side to side wiggle, tension in the bow arm and the forearm, hand tension, all of that kind of stuff shows up and it magnifies it a lot. So in a way, this is really good to help point out to you, maybe if you have some form flaws or something going on, you can address that with doing this step and get that taken care of for the rest of this. All right, now at this step, we're gonna start adding some weight onto the bow and have a lot of weight. I mean, that's the easiest thing I can say. Have a lot of 1 ounce weights, some 2 ounce weights, different things like that. Test this out and see what you can do. I mean, I literally have, this is my finished product after I figured out what weight system that I wanted to run and how I'm doing this so that I can make it all look, I guess, pretty and aesthetically pleasing to me. But I mean, I have weights in here, 1 ounce weights, tungsten weights, non-tungsten weights. I have a Ziploc bag full of a whole other set of weights, all of that just to begin with. And what I am doing here is starting out small and then just adding on and going through my process. So the first thing that I'm gonna do is draw back on target with 1 or maybe 2 ounces of weight on the front bar. And the reason that I'm doing this is what I'm going to start doing in my process is adding weight to the front of the bow until I see my left and right wiggles and the shakiness in my sight picture diminish. Ideally, I want it to go away, but that's where I'm gonna start with this. So I may add 1 weight to the front of the bow. I may add 2 weights to the rear of the bow, so on that rear bar. And I'm using that as a starting point just to see how this aims and how it balances. You're really not gonna see and feel a ton of difference with just a 1 and a 2, but if you add 2 to the front, 4 to the back, 3 to the front, 6 to the back, stuff like that, you're going to start seeing and feeling differences. Now for me, typically I like a little bit more front weight than some archers do, so I usually will start with the 1-to-2 ratio. If I have a bow that is very, I guess, top heavy forwards or balanced, it doesn't want to tip back like what we saw at the front of this video with my bow here, then I will probably do a 1-to-3 ratio because I don't need as much front weight versus back weight on that bow because the bow is already wanting to travel forwards or be balanced on its own. With this setup, 1-to-2, it's gonna balance pretty well for me, and for the most part, most of you will see that too. If you don't pull as hard into the back wall as other people, you're going to want more back weight. If you pull hard into the back wall, you're going to want more front weight. So again, adding this on and just seeing and feeling this out. I'm not changing angles of anything on the bars. I'm not doing anything with that. And I'm literally just getting it to the point to where my side to side waggle is gone. And then I'm going to look at the overall sight picture and what movements rather I'm getting with the bars. And what I mean by that is, when I'm working through my shot, does the bow want to naturally raise up out of the target when I start pulling through and adding some pressure to the back wall? Does it want to always feel heavy and feel like I'm holding up a boulder and I can't get it to, even as I expand and pull through the shot, I can't get it to hold and stay in the middle? If in that first scenario you are pulling through your shot and you see that you're constantly rising up, you're just not enough, there's not enough weight on the front of the bow versus the back of the bow. You got some options here. How severe is it? If you're rapidly moving up and the bow doesn't feel really heavy on your bow arm or your neck, then add some more weight to the front. It's going to help you with softening the movement. It's also going to help you with the balance, but only add an ounce to the front. Don't do anything to the back at that point. If it's not severe and it's very minute, then you may just want to try to angle the rear bar down a little bit, and shifting that bar down will help take some of the leverage away and it'll fine tune what you're seeing. Now, if you're the opposite and the bow feels really heavy at this point, then we have some issues. We need to keep enough front weight to where we don't have the left and right wiggle, but we need to start adding possibly some weight to the rear of the bar. So maybe just adding an ounce to the back, nothing to the front. See how that responds and see what you're getting with your sight picture. If that's helping, do this until you get the balance that you want. If that doesn't help, then that is an indicator that we need to take our loop and move it higher up on the string. You don't have enough leverage over the top of the bow when you're pulling, so you need to typically raise that loop up. There's some variables to this, but as a blanket statement, when we're just doing this video, that's what I would recommend. But I'm going to run through this entire process and then just start angling the bar down a little bit, and if it's needed, and I want my bow to balance itself in the middle as I'm pulling through the shot. And now, for me, that may mean that until I start pulling, that it does feel slightly heavy, and then as I pull, it stabilizes and holds out in the middle. Everybody's a little bit different in your shot style and what you're doing with your release execution. So just make sure that you're putting that into effect with what we're doing on weights. All right, let's talk angling the bar out away from the bow or into the bow. Why I'm doing certain things and what you need to be looking for personally. So for me, when I have this back bar angled out, what I am doing with that is angling out far enough that when I am getting to full draw, that my bubble wants to center itself back in the scope. If the back bar starts getting too far out away from the bow, for me, that starts making the bow want to tilt, and I have to start inputting too much of my hand into the bow and tilting it back to upright. I do like to have a little bit of my hand pushing into the bow to push against the weight of this back bar. And the reason I like doing that is I feel like it gives me more consistency on my aim and more consistency in my shot. And the reason that is because instead of just wanting to balance perfectly with my hand right here, and sometimes I tilt it here and sometimes I tilt it here, and the wind moves me around and I shake and bobble and move around, this way I have a little bit of side input, and then I'm working against that weight and it locks my arm in place and it actually steadies up my sight picture. Now, I don't want to get too extreme with this because you'll start noticing that if you're having to put a lot of hand into the bow and turn it a lot, that you'll get some weird paper tears, weird tuning issues. You'll also see some weird follow-throughs and some reactions of the bow at the shot. The other side to that is, depending on what style of archery you shoot, and if you have a lot of angles you deal with up and down, you won't want that back bar to be kicked out too far because it's going to make it harder for you if you're aiming downhill or uphill. So keep that in mind. I'm not getting too scientific on this. Again, stabilizer setup, it's really is not as hard as what a lot of people make it out to be. A lot of people want to think that it's really difficult and this magic secret and whatever's going on. And honestly, what I will say is most people don't spend enough time on their draw length and their loop length, and they think they can make their stabilizers make the bow stop and hold steady for them, and that is not the case. I'm going to take a hold because my draw length and my loop length and my form is good, and I'm just going to make it better by adding weight and dampening movement. If you're outside in the wind, you may want to have the back bar angled out a little bit more for that scenario so that you can fight some side-to-side wind and some movement. Your arm is a little bit more tense and taut holding into the bow, so keep that in mind too. You may find that you also want to change this when you're shooting indoors versus outdoors and in different scenarios. So don't be afraid to adjust this and change it. These mounts have, number system on them for a reason. So you can make notes in your phone, you can mark it with a pencil, pen, something like that. You know that you can change it back and forth and adjust it and do whatever you want. So don't be afraid to change things. Even if you think you have the bow shooting 100% perfect, but maybe it could get a little better, try an adjustment and see what happens. You can always put it back. If this video helped you or you think it'll help somebody else, thumbs up, like the video, share it with your friends. Also, if you're not subscribed, think about doing that. There's tons of videos on this channel for years now. You can go back and see a lot of information. I also have a members portion of this channel where you get extra videos, extra content, and access to me for coaching and help. So there's different levels there as to what you pay for and what you get. It's not super expensive either way. But any support you have from me, especially through the membership portion of it, is super appreciated, and it helps me be able to get different equipment or do different reviews, talk about different things with video equipment because the video equipment I have is getting better, scenarios, things like that. So thank you for watching the video today. Hopefully this helps you out and you can get some guidance here on setting up stabilizers and knowing that it's really not as difficult as a lot of people want to make it out to be. Maybe you need to work on draw length a little bit more in form. Maybe you don't, and you just need to tackle this and take care of it and handle it. Don't get caught up on ratios. You don't have to have a 1-to-2, 1-to-3, 1-to-4. There's not math that you can do and make this perfect. Just do it until you get the balance and the hold and the sight picture that you need. That is the best advice that I can give you. Thank you guys for watching this video today. I'll see you soon.